So coming up this weekend is going to be the next pay-per-view of the year, headlined by Leon Edwards fighting against Bilal Muhammad, with the co-main event being Tom Aspinall defending his interim championship bout at heavyweight against Curtis Blaydes. It's going to be UFC 304 taking place in Manchester, England. I am looking forward to this card. It's a 14-fight card. I really like long cards, and this is going to be a pretty good one in my opinion, in front of a crowd, which should end up being a pretty action-packed card with a couple of title fights at the top. Now, last week we just had what was on paper probably one of the worst UFC cards of all time. It did end up being okay with a couple bangers on the main card, thankfully, which did end up kind of saving the card. But this one's going to be a lot better, and We Want Picks made a lot of money on that last week's card. Jacob made so much money on some massive bets on fighters like Doo Ho Choi, as well as the submission props as well on a couple of big fighters like Verna Jandiroba, who ended up getting it done in the second round. That was a bad card. This is a good one with 14 fights, so now's a pretty good time to sign up for We Want Picks, which is a $10 per month premium membership service, where if you do sign up using my code ARTEM on the website, you can actually get a 3-day free trial, and you can cancel during that 3-day free trial. But if you do go further than the 3-day free trial, it is $10 per month, of course. But signing up using my code ARTEM does help support my channel, and out of that you get a lot of value. You will get access to Angelo and Jacob's bets from We Want Picks, which they do place every single week, as well as articles that I write every single week about non-UFC related events. So that can be Cage Warriors, KSW, Octagon, PFL, Contender Series, you name it, I've probably written about it. And then of course there is also other tools that can help you make your own bets, as well as other premium benefits in the Discord, which is free to join. If you haven't joined the Discord yet, I do recommend you do. There's a link in the description of this video. There's over 6,000 members in that Discord, which, as you can imagine, is a lot of people, and out of that you will get to talk about MMA and sports with just a bunch of other like-minded people who do like to talk about the fights as they happen as well. So then maybe that could improve your fight watching experience, getting to talk about the fights as they happen. Now, let's get into the first fight of the night. According to Tapology, I do understand that this is definitely not the correct belt order. I know that now Mokaev versus Manel has been moved to the prelims, but I'm just going to go with it, starting from the bottom fight up to the top so I don't miss anything. Caolan Loughran versus Jake Hadley is the first fight on this order here, and it is a short notice replacement fight. Caolan Loughran was meant to fight somebody else in a fight that a lot of people were very much excited for, but unfortunately his name has slipped my mind. It was Ramon Taveras, who was a pretty dangerous boxer. That would have been a pretty fun fight. And then I heard that it could have been Hector Sosa from Spain accepting the fight on short notice, but that didn't end up happening. It ended up being Jake Hadley coming up a weight class to fight against Loughran. I think that this fight is somewhat similar in a way to the Alan Nascimento matchup, which Jake Hadley had recently, well, 2 years ago, where he just fought a guy that was much, much bigger than him, that out-wrestled him and controlled him on top for the most part. And I think Loughran's going to be able to do the same. Loughran, I know he is 5'6", but he is very big for bantamweight. He has a lot of muscle, and he is just a tank. He's a pretty good wrestler. He will look to get the fight down to the ground. He doesn't really have the most exciting fighting style, but he does have a very interesting personality to go with it. And I think that he is going to look to take down Jake Hadley, and I think that he will find that success taking on the smaller guy in there. Jake Hadley also just failed 11 takedowns against Charles Johnson in his last fight, so we know that his wrestling may not be able to keep up with the guys like Loughran, who's going to be a lot bigger than him. But for Hadley, he gets to fight at home, and on top of that as well, he probably is going to get a new contract for taking this short notice up a weight class. Loughran's about minus 200 according to Tapology here, which I do believe is still the case. I do believe that we are going to see Loughran is minus 245. Sorry, so he's a little bit of a bigger favourite, but I think he's going to get the decision here and out-wrestle the much smaller guy in Hadley. Another short notice matchup that has been added now is Shauna Bannon fighting against Alice Ardelean. And if you guys don't know who Alice Ardelean is, she has a massive following outside of MMA, and she was actually meant to be on the Contender Series. Her Contender Series fight was actually never uploaded to Tapology, but she was training for the Contender Series, but has now got this matchup. Ardelean, I didn't know who she was, and when I was researching her for the Contender Series, I opened up her Instagram, was very surprised to see that she has over 500,000 followers, and a lot of that I think actually comes from her OnlyFans following, so there was a lot of stuff on there that was non-UFC related on her Instagram, and when I do watch her MMA fights, she's okay, but like she isn't really amazing in my opinion. A lot of the girls that she has fought have had losing records, and she is finishing a lot of them very quickly. This fight here against Jessica Munoz was pretty fun. You know, she was a 2-0 opponent at the time, and in that matchup, Ardelean is kind of just bombing forward the whole time, getting some takedowns, and a couple of knees in the clinch, and ends up winning that fight by first round shock to stoppage. But I do think that Shauna Bannon should be able to win. I mean, Shauna Bannon's kind of interesting to me because she is actually a former kickboxing world champion for WAKO, and that was actually the style of kickboxing that I trained in when I was just a little bit younger, when I was in high school. And Shauna Bannon, she disappointed me. I'll be honest with you. Got outstruck by Bruna Brazil, kind of fought Bruna Brazil in her own fight, and I will get to that, and what I mean by that probably when Bruna Brazil's fights comes up. And Brazil just beat her on the feet, and Shauna Bannon just a little bit low volume. She does train under Paddy, who is a former UFC fighter, who I guess has now retired to start his own gym, which is pretty cool. And she is also affiliated with Conor McGregor in some way, so maybe she does train with him as well, because we have seen photos of him and her together on Twitter. I think that we're going to see Shauna Bannon be able to beat Ardelean here. I think if Ardelean's going to win, she's going to have to get takedowns. Ardelean's striking's not that good. Like, she's very sloppy, but she's very high volume and all action. So there's a very good chance that this fight actually ends up being very fun, because Ardelean's just going to go out there and just bomb away. But I think I'm just going to have to still side with the most technical fighter out of the two, that is Shauna Bannon. It should be fun, but you know, I just don't know how I feel about Ardelean in the UFC, because she hasn't really beaten the best competition. Now we have Leroy Duncan fighting Gregory Rodrigues, and if you guys didn't know, this fight is actually on the main card now, because they moved Manel Kape versus Mokaev down to the prelims. But I am picking Gregory Rodrigues in this one here. I have been kind of liking what I've been seeing out of him recently, and that is just a little bit more grappling. When Gregory Rodrigues first came into the UFC, he was just striking with everyone, he was knocking everyone out, he had crazy aura, and then it was all snatched by Bruno Ferreira, who stepped up on short notice and knocked him out. Very proud to say that I picked Bruno Ferreira to win that matchup there. He was a big underdog at the time, made me look like a genius, and then he, you know, kind of got me back by beating one of my favourite fighters, Dennis Caolan. So it is what it is. And then he beat Tavares. And what is impressive to me about the Tavares win is not only just the fact that he knocked him out, and Tavares has been known to be a very tough guy, Tavares is also known to have incredibly good anti-wrestling. And in that matchup, Gregory Rodrigues attempted takedowns, and he got takedowns. And I genuinely believe that if he goes out there against Leroy Duncan and chooses to mix in his striking with that wrestling, he can get the win here. Because I think against CLD, if he does just play the striking game, I think he might lose, because Leroy Duncan is a very dynamic, athletic, and fast striker at 185 pounds. Now, he's looked very good in every single fight he's been in, aside from the Petrosian fight, where I will be honest, he kind of just looked like a little bit of an idiot, because Petrosian is just a much better striker, technically, than Leroy Duncan, and he really did just kind of expose that CLD kind of is like an athletic merchant in a way, because CLD was just trying to do way too much, throwing spinning kicks, sliding around on the ground, and Petrosian was just kind of piecing him up by just doing the basics correctly. Now, we have seen CLD kind of calm it down a little bit and have some very good performances over Dennis. And then against Claudio Ribeiro, who's no longer in the UFC anymore, unfortunately. But I think that we are going to see Gregory Rodrigues go out there and mix in that wrestling. I believe he was a national grappling champion in Brazil at one point, and we just don't see his grappling in the UFC anymore. But recently, after Bruno Ferreira snatched all of his aura, we have started to see him go to grapple a little bit more, and I do believe using that grappling with his powerful and good striking will definitely give him a much higher ceiling in the UFC, and I do believe that we still have Gregory Rodrigues as a slight underdog. Very slight underdog. He's minus 105 right now, and Leroy Duncan is minus 115. I do like Gregory Rodrigues. I think he is going to mix it up, that wrestling with that striking. Sam Patterson versus Kiefer Crosbie. I mean, it should be fun. I'm not that confident in Sam Patterson. I'm not minus 350 confident in Sam Patterson. I do have to say, I think the lines are very wide, but I think the line maker, or the odds makers, I should say, are probably expecting grappling out of Sam Patterson, because Kiefer Crosbie, in his most recent matchup, on short notice, albeit against Kevin Doucet in enemy territory, I will have to give him that credit, did still showcase a massive weakness in his game. And I do understand there was very little grappling in that matchup, but as soon as Kevin Doucet got that back of Kiefer Crosbie, Crosbie just put both of his hands on the mat and just let Doucet choke him out. So I'm kind of thinking that the odds makers are looking at Sam Patterson and how his style actually is pretty grappling heavy when he is doing things correctly and not on the receiving end of a knockout of the year contender against Yanam Ishmuz. He can grapple very well. And that is why I'm going to pick Sam Patterson here. I do believe that he should be able to take Kiefer Crosbie down some way or another and then out-grapple him and find a submission. But I don't feel minus 350 confidence. I've said it a few times. I just want to emphasize it. I think the lines are a little bit wide. Sam Patterson, as I said, we saw him get KO'd brutally. One of the most brutal KOs in recent UFC history. Honestly, it was sickening how bad that KO loss was against Yanal Ishmuz. But then he did come back against Johan Lainez, found a submission there. Similar stylistic matchup. Johan Lainez, big time power, but not really much else. Kiefer Crosbie, decent boxer, decent power, not really too much grappling. I guess you can put 2 and 2 together and find a minus 350 somehow. I like Sam Patterson though. He is a big dude. He's a former lightweight. Moved up to 170, probably for the best. And I think he's going to be able to submit Kiefer Crosbie in this matchup here, and a lot of people do agree. Mick Parkin now fights against Lukasz Brzeski, and one of my biggest regrets on my channel is picking Charlie Ontiveros to defeat Steve Garcia. But another one of my biggest regrets on my... That wasn't a bad pick though. Ontiveros dropped him twice, but another one of my biggest regrets is not picking Lukasz Brzeski to beat Walter Walker. I literally said in my breakdown that Walter Walker has absolutely no striking whatsoever and Brzeski should be able to beat him. And then I picked Walter Walker anyway. I'm an idiot. But I don't think he beats Mick Parkin here. Now, Mick Parkin, I will put my hand up and say, is a fighter that I heavily underrated, significantly actually coming into the UFC. He didn't really fight anyone, and I was very concerned about this lack of competition, not even just as a professional, but also as an amateur as well. A lot of his wins did come against guys with losing records. All of his pro wins came against guys with losing records. He had never fought a guy with a winning record until he fought Neves on the Contender Series. And then he beat Puguez, and then he beat Machado, which was scrappy, and then he beat Usman. But now in hindsight, does that Usman win look that good? Not really, but I think he still has enough to beat Brzeski. Mick Parkin, to my knowledge, does still train with Tom Aspinall, and training with Tom Aspinall as a heavyweight is definitely going to help you in many, many different ways. Brzeski was once like a super athletic, powerful dude. If you watch his Contender Series fight against Dylan Potter, you'll know what I mean. But then something happened to Brzeski which changed his career for the worst significantly, and he's never been the same since. It's just a small thing, you know, that, you know, it's just a little thing. And ever since this happened, he's just never been the same. So that's just unfortunate for Brzeski. He went on a 3-fight losing streak, managed to beat Walter Walker on the final fight on his contract, and obviously he's got another one. But I don't think the UFC's too happy with him because they're giving him Parkin. Parkin is a decent boxer. He will close the distance. He will grapple. He will wrestle. I think that's the path to beating Brzeski. I know Walter Walker couldn't do it, but unlike Walter Walker, Mick Parkin isn't lost on the feet. So I think that he should be able to showcase pretty decent boxing against Brzeski here, who is a very powerful striker, but should be able to expose that wrestling, which someone else in the past has done, like Carl Williams. Carl Williams was able to do it. Now, Waldo Cortez Acosta didn't do it in that way, just knocked him out. But I think Mick Parkin wins a decision here against Brzeski, using the boxing and the wrestling. And now we have Oban Elliot fighting against Preston Parsons. I'm sorry, I know there's a lot of Oban Elliot believers out there, but I'm just not really seeing it too much, you know. I feel like Oban Elliot has fought 2 times now under the UFC lights, firstly on the Contender Series against Kape in a decision that I disagree with, and then he fights against Val Woodburn, who nearly knocks him out on multiple occasions. I know that there's a lot of Oban Elliot believers out there, but I don't know. I mean, and Preston Parsons might not even be the guy to beat him, because Parsons is not dangerous on the feet at all. He is voice crack. He is a grappler. 9 wins by submission, most of them in the first round. You don't really like seeing this, because I am kind of relying on Preston Parsons in this matchup to be able to go all 3 rounds with Elliot. But I do still think that we're going to see Parsons go out there and find some success against Oban Elliot. Oban Elliot only is a wrestler. That's kind of all he's got. Now, he is a pretty big dude for 170, though. He has a lot of muscle on him, but his striking is, like, probably the worst in the division. I mean, this guy got knocked down multiple times by Val Woodburn, who I think is 5'6". You know, it's just, yeah. Preston Parsons doesn't have danger on the feet at all, but I think his striking is probably still going to be better than Oban Elliot's, but Elliot's going to look to get this fight down to the ground, and if Parsons can throw up submissions, I think he can find success here. I don't feel good about the pick, but I do think Preston Parsons is just the better fighter out of the 2, so I am going to pick Preston Parsons here to defeat Oban Elliot. If you're picking Oban Elliot, you are expecting him to get takedowns for 15 minutes and not get submitted doing so. And I just don't know if I can do that, man. Like, it's just, and even like then, Jack Shaw hasn't been looking that good recently, has he? So I'm going to go with Preston Parsons to win this one here. Most likely to win by decision. He looked alright against Simmelsberger. I believe actually against Simmelsberger he got like 7 takedowns out of 9 attempts or something absolutely insane. So yeah, he probably should be able to take down Oban Elliot. I don't feel great about it, but it is my pick. Minus 300 on Molly McCann is, it's a lot. I am going to pick Molly McCann, but I'm just going to guess that our fans have better up that wide. I mean, they are very, very wide odds for this matchup. I am still going to pick Molly McCann though, and the reason why is because I think it's a good stylistic matchup. As I kind of hinted to the Bruno Brazil fighting style earlier when I was talking about Shauna Bannon, Bruno Brazil is a Muay Thai striker, and she looks good when you let her fight her own fights, and that is just fighting from range, using her Muay Thai, throwing a couple of kicks, and then giving her a couple of seconds to admire how good her kick was. That's what she wants to do. She wants to be low volume, she wants to throw with technique, but she doesn't want to get into a scrap, she doesn't want to get pushed backwards, she just wants to go kick for kick, strike for strike, and Shauna Bannon allowed her to do that. Shauna Bannon allowed her to do that. Someone that didn't allow her to do that was Denise Gomes. If you watch that fight, Denise Gomes goes out there and just knocks her down all of the time, is constantly moving forward, has pretty poor technique, honestly, but it doesn't matter because she's pushing Bruno Brazil backwards, pressuring her, and landing bombs, and Bruno Brazil looked so uncomfortable in there with Denise Gomes. Molly McCann does have boxing, and I know she's got wrestling as well, but what she does is she is very much going to pressure forward. She is going to be the one moving forward against Bruno Brazil, throwing shots on the inside, and I think that that style of just pushing Bruno Brazil backwards is going to make Bruno Brazil very uncomfortable on the feet, and if you get the fight down to the ground, I don't think that Bruno Brazil's grappling is all that. Now, it's pretty hard to say that Molly McCann has great grappling when she did put herself in an armbar. Like, she literally put herself in that armbar. Stoliarenko didn't set it up at all. Watching the replay is actually insane. But, you know, losing at Erin Blanchfield, it is what it is, you know. But she submits Dinah Barbicha by armbar, which still doesn't make that much sense, but it is what it is. It's just the MMA, really, at the end of the day. You can't predict any of it. It's just a coin flip. But I think that Molly McCann is going to be able to go out there, pressure Bruno Brazil on the feet, and then look to get takedowns. It is worth noting as well, she did have a crazy spinning back elbow KO win streak happening in England, so maybe she can pull that back out, but I don't think so. I'm going to go with McCann to win by decision, maybe by submission, but probably by decision there. And now another fight with very wide odds. Nathaniel Wood is a minus 500 favourite against Daniel Pineda. I am once again going to pick Nathaniel Wood, but I don't recommend putting him in parlays at minus 500. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I don't really like Nathaniel Wood at 145 pounds. I actually believe he is a bantamweight, and I much prefer him fighting at 135. But I see that, and he has gone on to have a lot of success in this weight class. Defeated Andre Fili in a pretty close fight. Defeated Charles Jourdain, not the best aging win, but a good win at the time. And then lost a close fight to Naimov, who was just cheating the whole time. So shout out to Felipe Lima, who pulled that one out. Picked Felipe Lima as well in that one. Anyway, Daniel Pineda, he's massive for 145. I understand that he is, going to just be a little bit taller, but he's a big boy. And once again, there probably is a couple reasons why he is such a big boy. I mean, he is the only guy to beat Mavlid Kabuliev. Actually finished him in about 30 seconds, but just, once again, just a little small thing. Just a small thing. And I guess Daniel Pineda just was in PFL no longer, but UFC were like, what's up? How about you just come over here? And he did. And he finished Gilbert Burns, he beat Tucker Lutz, and then he fought against Alex Caceres and gassed out against Caceres, to be honest. Caceres could have potentially finished him later on. But what I'm trying to say about Daniel Pineda is he is going to have a massive size advantage against Nathaniel Wood, and he's a dangerous dude. He's got 25 wins by finish. All of his wins are by finish, and most of them have come in the first round, 17 of them in the first round. But I think overall, the more technical fighter, the fighter with a much better cardio out of the two, the guy that if it's in the third round is going to be able to push, is Nathaniel Wood. I think he is the better fighter out of the two. But honestly, if Daniel Pineda lands like a massive hook or gets a takedown and then latches up a submission or something like that using just his size, I wouldn't be that surprised, and that's why I don't love Nathaniel Wood at minus 500. Yes, I'm happy to recognize that he is the better fighter, he is the more technical fighter. The cardio, it's not even close. Daniel Pineda does gas out after the first round nearly every time. But I just struggle to see how only 3% are on Pineda here. I feel like he might be one of the more live plus 370 underdogs. I mean, I wouldn't recommend betting on it, but it's just hard to get that confidence in him. Bobby Green is fighting against Paddy Pimblett. I know he changed his name, but I'm calling him Bobby Green. Yeah. Bobby Green is fighting against Paddy Pimblett. And I'll be honest with you guys, my confidence in Bobby Green is waning a little bit. It is decreasing. Paddy Pimblett, one thing that I have noticed about him is it seems that he has sorted out his food disorder, his eating disorder, I should say, because if you guys can remember when he was in the UFC, in between fights, this guy was putting on so much weight, and then he was having to lose all of that weight in between fights, and lose the weight during the fight camp, so he wasn't really training the whole time. But now it seems like maybe he has sorted that out, maybe he doesn't really eat as much as he does in between camps, and maybe now he's really committed to training full time without breaks, I guess you could say that. But the flaws are still there, and they're big ones. Like Paddy Pimblett's chin, it is way up in the air. It just is. You never really see that with professional fighters these days, but it is. He does have his chin way up in the air. I don't understand why he doesn't tuck it. It's actually not that hard to do, honestly. But he's hittable, and he did gas out against Tony Ferguson. He did. In the third round, Tony Ferguson was putting it on Paddy a little bit, but Paddy was able to get a takedown in the end. And that was the end of Tony. But Tony Ferguson fights in 2 weeks, doesn't he? But yeah, so he beats Tony Ferguson. But in that fight, he did gas out in the third round, and I thought, hey, Tony's can do something here. But then Paddy Pimblett got the takedown. But what I'm trying to say is Paddy Pimblett's cardio isn't that great. We have seen Paddy Pimblett gas out before. He took the third round off against Jared Gordon, according to him. You don't really love to see that. And Bobby Green's decent. Now, I do understand that a lot of people are actually looking at the Jared Gordon fight and saying, oh, he didn't do that bad on the feet against Jared Gordon. And, Bobby Green was losing to Jared Gordon on the feet until he accidentally clashed the heads, So, yes, you could say that. But Bobby Green does have a very tricky boxing style. beat up Jim Miller badly. That was a bad stoppage, but knocked out Grant Dawson before that. But got dropped by Tony Ferguson, at least, for the Tony believers. But Bobby Green, I think that on the feet, I think that he's just going to be too good on the feet. I think he's going to be too tricky for someone like Paddy Pimblett to figure out. Now, Paddy Pimblett has had incredible performances in the striking. I believe it was his debut against Luigi Vendramini, where he was just throwing kicks and he was mixing it all up and he was looking so good. And then he ended up knocking out Luigi Vendramini. And then he had, in my opinion, not the best performance against Vargas, but he got it done. Had a good performance against Levitt by submitting Levitt, who's a good grappler. But I think that I'm trying to justify my Bobby Green take. I'm still going to go with him. My confidence really has gone down. There's just things about Paddy Pimblett, man, that I just can't really look past. And it's the cardio and it's the chin. He's so hittable on the feet. And Bobby Green is going to be a guy to take advantage of that. He's got that tricky boxing style that not many people have been able to figure out. He will try and slice you open with elbows as well. That's another big thing that Bobby Green can do. So Paddy's going to have to wrestle. And from what I've heard in interviews, and I never really do this ever, is listen to fighters' interviews because they usually say one thing and then do the opposite. But Paddy's been saying that he wants to showcase some striking. I don't know if I really believe him, but if he does, then I don't know. I just don't know. I'm going to pick Bobby Green. And now we have the featured prelim, which is on the main card of the Tapology card here. Mohamed Mokaev fighting against Manel Kape, and I have done some thinking. I've actually looked at numbers on the page, and I've been just looking at stats as well as watching the fights. And the stats for Mokaev don't really look that impressive. Like, this guy is attempting a lot of takedowns and is getting not many of them. And I guess you could look at Manel Kape, and the stats kind of don't really favour him all that much either, aside from the Matheus Nicolau fight, where I believe Nicolau, correct me if I'm wrong here, I believe he attempted 7 takedowns and he only got 2 of them against Kape. But then I look at the matchup against David Wojciak, and David Wojciak attempts 3 takedowns and gets 2 of them. Not really good numbers. Then you go to Mohamed Mokaev, I guess you could say, oh, he got 12 takedowns against Charles Johnson, but Johnson still defended about half of them and stood up quickly every single time. I think there was only 4 minutes of ground control time out of 12 takedowns that he got against Charles Johnson. Malcolm Gordon, he took down Malcolm Gordon, no problem, but against Malcolm Gordon kind of exposed, Malcolm Gordon, by the way, exposed some striking difficulty of Mokaev. Every single time that the fight was on the feet, Malcolm Gordon was able to find success on the feet, which is just absolutely crazy to watch back. Filio give him trouble on the ground, but he's just a pure grappler, so I don't really look into that when I'm looking a bit at the Manel Kape fight. He was down 2 rounds against Tim Elliott on 2 scorecards. One of the scorecards was 1-1. One of them was 2-0 Tim Elliott. So if he didn't get that triangle choke in the 3rd round, he would have lost that decision. And then Alex Perez, he doesn't really get too many takedowns against Perez. He does get a lot of control, and he does actually, I believe, outland Perez on the feet. But yeah, just still attempted a lot of takedowns and didn't really get many. That's what I'm trying to get to. The takedown accuracy of Mokaev isn't that high, but I guess you could say, oh, he makes up for it by attempting takedowns all the time, because that is going to put Manel Kape on the back foot. If Mokaev is constantly shooting for takedowns, Kape is going to have to think about it, and it is going to affect his striking. If Mokaev is constantly shooting for takedowns, there's a very good chance that Kape is on the back foot, and he's also got his back up against the cage, and he's having to defend takedowns up against the cage, and that gives Mohamed Mokaev control time against the cage. Like, if you look at the fight against Charles Johnson, I believe the control time for Mokaev is 11 minutes, but it's all cage control time for the most part, really, so it doesn't really count too much. And the thing is, as well, about the scoring system, is it's all damaged base. So if Mokaev doesn't do any damage like he did against Tim Elliott, he's going to lose the rounds, because Kape is going to be the better striker, and in my opinion, it's not actually that close. So I kind of look at the matchup, and I think, if Kape can keep the fight on the feet, he's going to win. It's as simple as that. But I look at Mohamed Mokaev, and the one thing that you can do with Mohamed Mokaev that you can't do with a lot of fighters is you can trust him to attempt takedowns. That's the thing, because a lot of the times I make a prediction kind of based on the thought or the assumption that someone's going to attempt takedowns, but then I find out that they've got some of the worst fight IQ on the planet, and they don't shoot for takedowns. So, that's another thing. I can trust the IQ of Muhammad Mokaev. I know that he knows that he's going to have to get takedowns in this matchup. But do you just rely on the craziness of Kape to just knock him out? Because I could see that happening. It's kind of one of those situations where I'm not the only one in this boat either. I think there's a lot of people waiting to fade Muhammad Mokaev, because I think a lot of people aren't viewing him as someone that's able to capture the belt right now. But he is someone that's going to be able to capture the belt in the next couple of years, for sure. But is this the fight to fade Mokaev? And I'm going to say... I'm going to say yes, because I picked Kape a couple of weeks ago. Once again, that confidence has decreased, but the Alex Perez performance isn't impressive to me at all. The Malcolm Gordon performance is a massive red flag to me. I even think that there's actually an argument that Charles Johnson won that fight based on pure damage-based scoring. I think if you're going to look at it, but the thing is, Manel Kape went to war with Felipe dos Santos. Felipe dos Santos could go to war with anyone, so I guess you can kind of take that out. I'm going to go with Kape to win. I don't feel good about it. I think his movement on the feet's going to be too much. I'm going to go with Kape to win by KO or decision. This really could be an aura-snatching moment for both guys, though, because the loser of this fight is going to be auraless, because Mokaev's going to snatch all of Kape's aura, and then Kape could snatch all of Mokaev's aura. So there's a lot to kind of unpack here. And now we move on to the featured fight. I believe it still is the featured fight with the order. Arnold Allen fighting against Giga Chikadze. I don't really like Arnold Allen at minus 260. And the reason why is because Arnold Allen's striking style is quite low volume, for the most part. If you actually really do look into the stats, just the pure stats and the fights as well, of course, but just look at the stats for his fights. His performance against Sadiq Yusuff, he really could have lost that fight if he didn't get knockdowns, because Sadiq Yusuff actually outlanded him somewhat significantly. And so did Nick Lentz, actually. But because Arnold Allen hit so hard, he was able to get some knockdowns, he was able to stun Yusuff and Lentz, and was able to end up, of course, winning the fight and stealing the rounds and winning the fight that way. He knocks out Dan Hooker in the first round, very impressive. Was beating up Calvin Kattar, kind of, and then the knee injury happened. And then he has two very good close decisions against Evloev and Max Holloway. But of course I did think that Max Holloway won that fight, even though Ariel Helwani would disagree with me on that. And then Movsar Evloev. Yeah, maybe beat Arnold, I don't know. But the thing is, in this one though, that's a striker versus striker matchup. And I know that Giga Chikadze was very inactive. I think he got injured pretty badly and then he beat Alex Caceres. But Chikadze is a guy that I think you can trust to actually be the guy throwing more volume in the matchup. So you're going to just have to rely on, well, once again, Arnold Allen landing the bigger shots, because Arnold Allen is not a high volume striker for the most part, but he can wrestle and grapple and he can pressure forward. And that is what has kind of melted Giga Chikadze's entire style in the past. You know, he was fighting against Calvin Kattar, and Kattar, like, not only just with the wrestling, also with the pressure that he was applying to make Giga Chikadze fight backwards, really just kind of melted Giga Chikadze, and Chikadze did fade significantly in that fight, and Kattar was able to take over and have a very, very impressive performance in that matchup, probably still the best performance of his career to date. And I think Arnold Allen can actually look at that game plan and maybe just not implement as much wrestling, but can implement the idea of just constantly pushing Giga Chikadze backwards, landing shots on the inside, maybe some clinches every now and then, maybe some takedown attempts every now and then, and getting it done against Giga Chikadze here, because we have seen Giga Chikadze fade to a style that Arnold Allen does fight in before. I do worry about the low volume of Arnold Allen, but I still do think that he should be able to pull it off here, and I am going to pick him to win by decision with a potential knockout as well. Giga Chikadze's not getting any younger either. He's nearly 37 at 145 pounds. So his title to the championship is very small. Why is this at the top? Let's talk about Bukauskas versus Marcin Prachnio really quickly. It's a mirror matchup. Really, both guys are pretty much the same. They're just light heavyweight strikers. And I do think that Modestas Bukauskas is going to land more volume out of the two. And by doing that, he's just going to do more damage. I do think that his Tyson Pedro win, although aging terribly, is very impressive in the way that he did that. I think he can do the same against Marcin Prachnio, who just kind of is a karate merchant, really. And now the co-main event is Tom Aspinall versus Curtis Blaydes. Once again, it is another rematch, but the first fight just didn't really quite happen. I mean, unless you're John Jones and you think that Curtis Blaydes was piecing up Tom Aspinall for like the 30 seconds that the fight lasted. The fight lasted 15 seconds, and Tom Aspinall was talking about how Curtis Blaydes was piecing him up for 15 seconds. Yeah. That happened, but yeah, I think Tom Aspinall does win. I do think he beats Curtis Blaydes. Once again, minus 400 is very wide, but I guess Curtis Blaydes is one of those guys that I think has completely fallen in love with his hands. I genuinely believe that he improved his boxing significantly, showcased it against Chris Dalkaus conversations in 2024, and then I think he just kind of thought that because he pieced up Chris Dalkaus on the feet, he's the next Floyd Mayweather, and struck against Tom Aspinall. 15-second fight, doesn't count. And then he struck for 3 minutes against Sergey Pavlovich. And when you strike against Sergey Pavlovich and your name isn't Alexander Volkov or Tom Aspinall, you're going to get knocked out. And that's what happened. Curtis Blaydes got knocked out because he didn't attempt takedowns against Pavlovich. And then he beat Almeida by hammer fisting him, and Almeida's just got terrible fight IQ. But in that fight, you can't deny the fact that Almeida was able to out-wrestle Curtis Blaydes. Now, prior to all of those fights that I mentioned before, Curtis Blaydes was a wrestling machine at heavyweight. You know, he was getting like 4 or 5 takedowns a fight, which was crazy. He was dominating with control time. That is how he managed to defeat Yairzinho Rozenstruik. But he was kind of still struggling with the striking. You know, he was the best wrestler in the weight class, but he couldn't really hang there on the feet, so he was still a little bit too one-dimensional, and that was kind of exposed by fighters in the past like Derek Lewis and Ngannou, even though those fights, well, the second one didn't last very long. But Tom Aspinall is a good grappler, and he's a decent wrestler, and he's the much better striker. Much better striker. In fact, before finding MMA, I believe he was training in jiu-jitsu, but he was training in boxing with the Fury family, so he actually was potentially going to eye up a career in boxing, and you kind of see that in the UFC, because his boxing for heavyweight is very crisp. Like, it's very, very nice. He knocked out Sergey Spivak, which I guess is a similar stylistic matchup, beat Volkov, and the way that he beat Volkov by dominating him in that aspect has aged incredibly well for him now. And then knocked out Tybura in his return fight, knocked out Pavlovich in his return fight, which is just amazing, honestly, in the way that he managed to pull that one off. And I did pick Pavlovich to beat Aspinall, which was a dumb pick in hindsight, but it is what it is. I think Aspinall's well-rounded, man. I think he's got the power on the feet to give Curtis Blaydes problems. I know that Curtis Blaydes' boxing has improved, but can you trust him to mix in the wrestling and mix in the takedowns that much? I don't know if you can anymore. You know, he hasn't really been attempting takedowns for, 2 years, 2.5 years now, 3 years. He hasn't been attempting takedowns like that before. I think he is going to try and test out his striking against Aspinall. I think he's going to get knocked out. So I'm going to pick Tom Aspinall. I'm going to pick him by KO. Yes, Blaydes, I think, is getting very disrespected and underrated into this matchup. But if I look at just recent performances, he's not doing what he's best at. He's not wrestling anymore. And I can't pick Curtis Blaydes based on the belief that he can wrestle when he hasn't wrestled for 3 years. So that's the pick there. And we move on to the main event. Leon Edwards fighting against Belal Muhammad. Leon Edwards is going to win this, man. I mean, I'm sorry. I know there's a lot of Belal Muhammad believers, and especially in my community. There's a lot of Belal Muhammad fans that are subscribed to the Art and MMA channel, and I'm just disappointed, a lot of them. But I can't see Leon Edwards losing to him. I really can't. That is the pick. I think Leon Edwards wins. Hopefully not a boring decision, and hopefully it's by KO, because Leon Edwards, he's due for an exciting performance. You know, he did win against Kamaru Usman in a very, very impressive knockout win, but then the fight against Usman in the rematch was okay. The fight against Covington was okay. Like, he hasn't really been putting up great performances since the win over Usman the first time. But I've been with Leon Edwards the whole way, man. I know a lot of people have as well, but there have not been that many people, a very, very small percentage, I would say, of people that picked Edwards not only in the first fight, but the second fight, and the fight against Covington. I've seen people out there ride with Edwards against Usman, but then pick against them against Covington. And I look at the Belal Muhammad matchup, and I think that Belal Muhammad is just another similar stylistic matchup to the Kamaru Usman fight and the Covington fight, you know? Because Belal Muhammad, he's a wrestler, yeah? And his striking's not that dangerous. I mean, he's never knocked anyone down in the UFC. So, his striking's not that dangerous unless you're Sean Brady, but Sean Brady was getting pieced up by Michael Chiesa, who's one of the worst strikers in UFC history. So, I don't even know if that counts, I'll be honest. And I just don't think that Belal Muhammad is going to be able to get takedowns on Leon Edwards when Colby Covington couldn't, and when Kamaru Usman couldn't in the rematch, you know? And even then, in the first round at Elevation, Leon Edwards found a lot of success as well. I just can't see him losing. I think that Edwards is so much better on the feet out of the two. I don't think it's close on the feet. I really don't. And I just can't see Edwards getting taken down and dominated for 25 minutes by Belal either. So, yeah, that's where the pick comes. I know a lot of people are going to disagree, but yeah, I just can't see Leon Edwards losing this matchup. I really can't. And I don't know, maybe that's just delusion, but I just can't see it happening. I really can't. So I like Leon Edwards in this matchup. I think he wins this matchup by decision, but I'm really hoping for a KO because Leon Edwards, man, like, you need to be a little bit more exciting. It's just becoming a little bit too hard to defend. I wish that Leon Edwards had Alejandro Pantoja's activeness as a champion, you know, like, Edwards, mate, you're 33, you're past your prime, and you're not fighting this often, and that's another thing, speaking of the age, Belal Muhammad's 36, he's an old man at this point, you know, he's probably 4 or 5 years past his prime at this point, but somehow he's just pulling out decision wins, so it is what it is. The fight probably goes the distance, which is sad, but I do think that Leon Edwards wins. And maybe it is just pure delusion from me, but I just can't really see... I just can't see Leon Edwards losing. I really can't. So, maybe I'm not the best person to look at for this breakdown, but yeah, I just cannot see it happening. So let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next one.